Hi everyone, this is a video to take you through the non-price factors that affect the demand for goods and services. This is to follow on from the video done before on how price affects the demand. And in fact, it doesn't affect the demand, it just affects the quantity demanded for goods and services. So for these factors, whenever these factors change, it's actually going to have a significant change on the entire demand for goods and services, and therefore this is going to be represented by a whole shift of the line. The whole line is going to move, and that's how you're going to represent it in your diagrams. So let's get into it. Okay, so factors that shift the demand curve will cause the entire demand curve to shift, which is the terminology we use when the whole line moves. And you can see that in the diagram below. So an increase to demand is going to be seen here by a shift of the line to the right. Okay, now I know it kind of looks like it's going up and increasing, but I want you guys to use the language of an increase is whenever the curve moves to the right, and a decrease, as seen in the second graph here, is when the curve shifts to the left. So I want to really get that terminology down pat because it makes sense here. An increase kind of looks like up when it comes to demand, but it's going to make your life a lot easier when we get to supply. If when a curve increases, it shifts to the right. When it decreases, it shifts to the left. All right, so let's get into the factors. So there are 8 factors, I think, all up, that shift the demand curve, and that can be really hard to remember them all. So what I'm recommending you do is you split them into groups of 3 and 5. Your first 3, when these 3 factors change, it's generally only going to affect a single market. Okay, so those 3 things are price of substitutes, price of complements, and preferences and tastes. We're going to go through in a minute what these are, but breaking big lists down into smaller chunks is a really, really good learning strategy to remember things. So a list of 8 is really hard, but 3 and 5 you can do. So those are the things that affect one market. Whereas when these 5 things change, it has an effect on most markets, not a singular one. So when disposable income changes, that's going to change the level of income for people, and that's going to affect their demand for most markets, as will a change in interest rates, population, consumer sentiment, and government intervention. Okay, so let's get into it. All right, so these are the factors affecting one market. Now, we just had them on the screen before. Pause the video in a tick here and see if you can remember all 3. Go. All right, did you remember the first one, which is price of substitutes? What is a substitute? A substitute is something where it is a comparable good or service. And I want you to think of this sometimes in a sporting sense. You'll have a substitute player. And what does that mean? Well, that's one player that comes on and just does the job of that player that's coming off. So in economics, substitutes are goods or services that you either have one or the other. You don't have both. And an example I'm using here is the market for soft drinks or the market for orange juice. You're not going to, when you go into a milk bar, you're not going to want to demand both of these things. You're generally only going to want to demand one. So what I want you to think of is, okay, if the price of the orange juice market were to fall, what's going to happen to the market for Coke or soft drink, I should say? So when the price of orange juice falls, what effect is that going to have on the market for Coke? On the demand? Well, it's actually going to cause a decrease in demand for Coke because it's now relatively more expensive. So you'll see here demand decreases when the price of a substitute falls. Make sense? If it doesn't make sense, rewind the video and go over this section. Moving on to the next one. Did you remember price of complements? Complements are kind of the opposite of a substitute. So a complement is a good or a service that is consumed together. And the example I'm going to use here is a console and a console game. You are going to consume these 2 things together, but you're going to purchase them separately. Now, understanding the effect on the demand for a complement can be really, really tricky and confusing because sometimes you can mix up which market you're actually talking about. All right, so here what I've drawn for you is the demand for Xbox games. Okay, so you're going to have to guess what is going to happen to the demand for the game when there's a change to the market for the console. All right, so the question will actually tell you that the price of consoles has fallen, and you've got to tell me what is now going to happen to the demand for games. So pause this video, have a think about it. When the price of consoles fall, what is the effect on the demand for games? And the answer is it's going to see an increase in the demand for games. And this should make sense because if consoles were $550 and now they're $400, that's an extra $150 of value or utility that consumers are getting from that purchase. And they can then put that towards the complement for that particular item. There's heaps of complements out there. Butter and bread is another one that people use. I like consoles and games because you absolutely have to have them consumed together for that transaction to work. All right, next one. Preferences and tastes. Please don't think because the word tastes is in here that it's about food. Preferences and tastes are all about consumer favor towards a good service or market. And when consumers view a particular good service or market favorably, well, then demand is going to increase, or if they see it unfavorably, it's going to decrease. The example I'm using here is our toilet paper. In 2020, you might have heard of a thing called the coronavirus, and there was a huge favor toward buying lots of toilet paper. So due to preferences and tastes, I want you to predict what is going to happen to the demand for toilet paper after people start crazy buying of things they really don't need. And of course, this is going to cause an increase for the demand for toilet paper. Which way does the line go? And it goes to the right. There we go. All right, so those are the three factors affecting a single market. Now we go on to the 5 that affect most markets. So I want you to pause the video and write down, see if you can write down all 5. Okay, now we're back. So what are the factors affecting most markets? Let's start with disposable income. So what is disposable income? Well, it's your personal income or your gross income minus tax. All right, and that is classified as disposable income. Think of it as the money that you actually get to spend on things. So demand will increase across most markets when income actually increases. That kind of makes sense. If we have more money, we generally spend it. So what I want you guys to think of is when there is an increase in disposable income, what's going to happen to the demand curve? Is it going to shift to the right or the left? And the answer is to the right. Okay, the demand for goods and services are going to increase at every price level. All right, now we're going to go on for interest rates. And interest rates are the cost of borrowing money. This is what you've got to pay the bank on top of the money you've already borrowed. So you borrow $100,000 from the bank, they will expect you to pay that back plus a little bit extra. And the rate of which you pay back that little bit extra is called an interest rate. Students really, really mess up these interest rates because it's opposite in direction. Because when interest rates go down, demand actually increases for things. And that's where it can kind of fry your noodle a little bit. Yeah. And the reason being is, well, when interest rates fall, that little bit extra that people have to pay back on their loans actually becomes smaller, and they've got more money left over for other things. So I want you guys to make a prediction here. When interest rates fall, what's going to happen to this demand line here? Is it going to shift to the right or the left? And it is going to go to the right. It's going to increase demand for most goods and services because there's more money to spend on them. Next one, changes in population. This is obviously the number of people in an economy. There's generally 2 ways that the population can change within the economy. One is a change in the birth rate. We're making more babies or we're making less babies. And speak to your health teacher if you're not sure how that happens. Or the other one is immigration. Yeah, the bringing in of people from other countries. If there is an increase to demand when population rises, and there's a decrease to demand when population falls, purely because there's just less customers. All right. So make a prediction here. What's going to happen to the demand for education after there's an increase in demand? Sorry, an increase in population. So there's more people around, And so therefore we're going to demand more education. There's going to be a higher demand for primary schools, for high schools, and for universities. All right, flying through. Next one, consumer sentiment or consumer confidence. This is in the consumer's perceptions about future income levels. Will they have enough money in the future? So demand is going to increase when consumer sentiment rises, when people feel confident about their future financial position, and it's going to fall when consumer sentiment falls. At the moment, lots of people are unemployed. Yeah, they're not sure about what's going to happen into the future. So I want you to predict what's going to happen now after all this coronavirus stuff for the demand for speedboats. Are they going to increase the demand for speedboats or decrease after people aren't very confident at the moment? I'm hoping you all got this one right, and it is going to be a decrease in demand for speedboats. People are going to put off this purchase until the future when they're more confident about their future financial position. All right, government intervention. We're on to the final one here. So government intervention is a bit of a weird one because they can intervene at a whole economy level or at a specific market level. But generally speaking, it's an economy-wide one. What is government intervention? Well, it's influence over the allocation of resources. What I want to, the example I've used here is, let's say the government gives a rebate, which is money back, for installing renewable technology on your homes. What's that going to do for the demand for solar panels? Is it going to increase the demand? Is it going to decrease? Is it going to shift to the right or shift to the left? Make a prediction. Pause the video if you need. And it is going to be a trick question. It is not a shift. Why is this not a shift? Pause the video and think. Why is the government giving subsidies or money back for people to install solar panels on their roofs? Why is that not a shift of the demand curve for solar panels? Pause the video until you come up with an answer. And the answer is this is purely a change in price. They are just lowering the price for consumers. So therefore, it's not demand that shifts. It is just the quantity demanded that increases. Be careful with this one, okay? Be careful with all of these that it's if it's price that's changed, it's just a movement along the curve. If it's something else, then it's a shift. So let's go over something else. Okay. So after you guys have all been homeschooled, not homeschooled, but doing your learning from home, which is a government intervention, they've told you that you have to learn from home. What is the effect on the demand for internet services, do you think? And this one should be easy. It's going to be an increase in demand. Now, is that a shift to the right or to the left? And it is a shift to the right. All right. So here is a recap. These are the key points I really, really want you to take out of this entire presentation. For all demand questions, you've got to ask yourself, and this is the great part about demand, because you guys are consumers, what would I do in this scenario if this thing were to change? Based on that change, would I increase my demand or would I decrease my demand for that good? So use your experience as a consumer in this economy to help guide your decision making. Again, just for demand though, because you ain't suppliers, so it gets confusing when we get to supply. But for demand, what would you do? An increase in demand is a shift to the right, and a decrease in demand is a shift to the left. And then finally, if the price of the market has changed, do not shift the line. It is simply a movement along the line. And repetition over practice questions on movements and shifts is going to be your best friend in getting this stuff right. Thanks for hanging out with me on this one, guys. It's been a long one. Any questions or anything that's unclear, don't forget the beauty of the videos is you can go back over the videos and go over any concepts misunderstood, or feel free to ask questions directly to me or to each other. Thanks, guys.